It is around 2 o'clock in the morning in a quiet medieval town. The streets are completely empty, and most people are still sleeping deeply inside their small wooden homes. But for the baker, the day is already beginning. He slowly opens his eyes before dawn because bread must be ready long before the rest of the town wakes up. His early schedule has become a normal part of his life. There are no alarm clocks, no electric lights, and no modern conveniences. Years of repetition have trained the baker's body to wake up at almost exactly the same time every single day. The moon still hangs above the rooftops while cold air quietly enters through small gaps in the wooden walls of his house. The baker sits up slowly and stretches his tired arms. Yesterday was also a long day filled with heavy work, and today will be exactly the same. Yet there is little room for complaint because feeding the town depends on him. Bread is one of the most important foods people eat every day. He carefully gets out of bed so he does not wake the rest of his family. His wife and children continue sleeping under thick wool blankets while he quietly prepares himself for another demanding morning. Every movement is gentle because the house is small and every sound can easily travel. He washes his face with cold water stored inside a clay container. The sudden chill helps him become fully awake. There is no hot running water, so everyone must adapt to simple conditions. This daily routine is ordinary for medieval people and has been repeated for generations. The baker puts on his simple wool clothing and ties an apron around his waist. His clothes are plain and practical because beauty matters less than usefulness. Flour dust will soon cover everything anyway, making expensive clothing completely unnecessary. Before entering the bakery, he pauses for a moment near the doorway. The town is still silent except for a few distant animal sounds. Somewhere nearby, a rooster may soon begin crowing, announcing that sunrise is slowly approaching. The baker opens the wooden bakery door and immediately notices yesterday's familiar scent of flour, ash, and baked bread. This smell has become a permanent part of his life. To him, it is the smell of work, responsibility, and survival. He checks the wooden shelves where flour sacks are stored. Every ingredient must be carefully protected because replacing them is expensive. If something goes wrong, many families may not have enough bread for the day. The first hours before sunrise are often the quietest moments of the entire day. Soon customers will arrive, conversations will begin, and the bakery will become busy. But right now, in the darkness before dawn, only the baker is awake and preparing to serve an entire town. He walks across the bakery floor with a small candle in his hand. The soft flame creates dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Every corner of this room is familiar because he has spent thousands of hours working here throughout his life. The baker carefully examines his wooden tools before beginning work. Large mixing bowls, measuring containers, cloth coverings, and long wooden paddles all sit exactly where they were left the previous evening. Organization saves precious time during busy mornings. Even before any bread is made, much preparation is already required. A successful baker cannot simply wake up and begin baking immediately. Every task follows a specific order that experience has taught him over many years. He listens carefully to the sounds around him. In medieval towns, people often relied on their senses more than clocks. The wind, the animals, and the changing darkness of the sky all help him understand the passing of time. Outside, narrow streets remain covered in darkness. Small houses stand quietly side by side, and smoke no longer rises from their chimneys. The entire town appears peaceful before the demands of another busy day begin. The baker silently thinks about the amount of bread he must prepare today. Larger families will buy multiple loaves, while travelers passing through town may also stop by the bakery during the morning hours. Every day carries a small uncertainty. Some days people buy more bread, while other days they buy less. A baker must estimate carefully because wasted ingredients can create serious financial problems. Despite the hard work, the baker understands the importance of his role in society. Bread is more than food. It represents comfort, routine, and stability for hundreds of ordinary people living their daily lives. The darkness outside slowly begins to soften. The stars are still visible, but a faint hint of blue starts appearing near the horizon. Dawn is approaching, and soon the entire rhythm of the town will begin changing. For a few final moments, the baker enjoys this rare silence before the demanding hours ahead. The peaceful atmosphere before sunrise may be the calmest part of his entire day. A brief pause before many hours of physical labor begin. The baker gently opens a small window and feels the cold pre-dawn air touch his face. For a brief moment, he stands still and looks toward the dark sky above the town. These quiet moments are rare in his life, and he has learned to appreciate them before the noise and demands of the day begin. His hands already carry signs of many years of work. Small scars, rough skin, and tired fingers tell the story of countless mornings spent inside this bakery. Baking bread is not an easy profession, but it is an honest one that the community deeply depends upon. Sometimes he remembers learning these skills from an older baker many years ago. Knowledge was often passed from one generation to another through observation and practice. Every movement he makes today was once carefully taught to him by someone with more experience. Soon, other workers or apprentices may begin arriving to help with the busiest tasks. Young learners often start before sunrise as well, slowly mastering the difficult routines that make a bakery successful. Every day becomes another lesson in discipline and patience. The baker quietly reviews the entire schedule inside his mind. There is little time for mistakes because every step depends on the previous one being completed correctly. Good preparation before sunrise makes the rest of the morning run much more smoothly. As dawn approaches, a few distant sounds begin appearing around the town. A cart will move somewhere in the distance, and another early worker may already be leaving home. The town slowly starts waking from its long night's sleep. The baker takes one final deep breath before beginning the heavier work ahead. This peaceful transition between night and day has become one of the most familiar experiences of his entire life. Soon, darkness will disappear completely, and a new day will officially begin. The baker now turns his attention to the largest and most important tool inside the bakery, the massive stone oven. Unlike modern kitchens, this oven cannot simply be switched on with a button. It takes time, effort, and careful planning to prepare enough heat for the entire day's bread. Before adding any firewood, the baker opens the heavy iron door and checks the inside of the oven. Small piles of ash remain from yesterday's baking. Cleaning the oven is an important task because leftover debris can affect both the heat and the quality of the bread. Using a long wooden scraper, he slowly pours out the old ash and places it inside a metal container. Fine grey dust rises into the air and settles onto the floor. This is a normal part of every morning, and a task repeated thousands of times. Now, he carefully selects dry pieces of firewood stacked against the bakery wall. Choosing the correct wood matters greatly because different types burn at different speeds. Dry wood produces stronger and more reliable heat. He arranges the wood inside the oven with great attention. Larger pieces go toward the back while smaller pieces stay near the front. This careful arrangement helps the fire spread evenly throughout the oven. The baker kneels down and uses a small flame from his candle to ignite the kindling. At first, only a few tiny flames appear. Slowly, the fire begins to grow stronger, filling the oven with warmth and light. Soft crackling sounds now echo throughout the bakery. The scent of burning wood fills the air and becomes one of the first signs that the bakery is fully coming to life for another day of work. Heating a medieval oven is not a quick process. Sometimes it can take a long time before the stones absorb enough heat. Patience is one of the baker's most valuable skills. The baker carefully watches the flames instead of walking away. Too much fire can overheat the oven, while too little fire may leave the bread undercooked later in the morning. Outside, darkness is slowly disappearing, but inside the bakery, another sunrise is taking place. The growing fire casts orange light across the room as the baker quietly prepares for the busiest hours ahead. The baker stays close to the oven during these important first moments. He uses a long wooden stick to gently move the burning logs into better positions. This helps the fire spread evenly and prevents one side of the oven from becoming hotter than the other. As the flames grow stronger, the temperature inside the stone chamber slowly rises. The baker cannot read numbers from a thermometer because none exist. Instead, years of experience teach him how to judge the heat using only his eyes and instincts. He studies the color of the flames and watches how quickly the wood burns. Even small details provide useful information. Every experienced baker develops a unique understanding of how his own oven behaves each morning. The thick stone walls begin storing heat deep inside their surface. This stored heat is extremely important because it will continue cooking bread long after the fire itself has been reduced. The baker occasionally adds another piece of wood to maintain a steady fire. He avoids adding too much at once because controlling the temperature is one of the hardest parts of the entire baking process. As warmth spreads throughout the bakery, the cold air of the early morning slowly disappears. The room becomes more comfortable, and the familiar atmosphere of another working day finally begins to emerge. The sound of crackling wood mixes with the quiet noises of the waking town outside, somewhere nearby. Another shopkeeper may also be beginning their own daily routine before sunrise. Lighting the oven is not simply a preparation step. In many ways, it is the true beginning of the baker's entire day. Without a properly heated oven, every other task that follows could fail. The baker never rushes this process. He understands that patience now will save many problems later. A steady and balanced fire is far more valuable than a powerful fire that quickly burns out. As the fire reaches its ideal strength, the bakery starts feeling alive. Orange light dances across the stone walls, and the baker quietly moves on to the next stage, knowing the heart of the bakery is finally awake. The baker now walks around the oven and places his hand near the opening to feel the strength of the heat. He does not touch the stone itself, but years of experience allow him to understand whether the temperature is rising correctly. He uses a long wooden tool to spread the burning wood more evenly. Sometimes one side burns faster than the other, so constant adjustments are necessary to create balanced heat throughout the oven. Tiny sparks occasionally rise into the air before quickly disappearing. The baker watches them carefully while remaining calm. This process is slow, and every movement is done with patience rather than speed. The heavy stone structure slowly transforms into a giant storage of heat. Once fully warmed, it will hold enough energy to bake dozens of loaves of bread throughout the morning. The baker briefly steps outside the bakery door and notices that the sky is becoming lighter. A soft blue color is beginning to replace the darkness of the night. Returning inside, he checks the flames once again. He has learned that leaving the oven unattended for too long can create problems later in the day. The smell of burning oak and ash fills every corner of the bakery. For the baker, this scent is as familiar as breathing itself because he has lived with it for many years. Soon, the warmth from the oven reaches every part of the room. The once cold bakery now feels alive and welcoming instead of dark and empty. The baker takes a quiet moment to admire the fire. Although it is hard work, there is satisfaction in knowing that this simple fire will soon feed an entire community. With the oven finally reaching its proper temperature, the baker prepares himself for the next important task ahead. The foundation of the day's work is now complete, and the bakery is ready for bread making. With the oven finally warming the bakery, the baker turns his attention to preparing the dough. This is one of the most important stages of the entire morning because every loaf of bread begins with a simple combination of ingredients. He walks toward large sacks of flour resting against the wooden wall and carefully decides how much he will need for today's customers. The baker lifts a heavy sack and puts flour into a large wooden mixing bowl. A small cloud of white dust rises into the air before slowly settling onto the table. Years of experience have taught him how much flour to use without measuring every detail. His eyes and hands have become his most trusted tools. Next, he reaches for a clay container filled with clean water collected earlier. Water is added carefully because too much or too little can completely change the final result. Every movement is deliberate and unhurried because rushing often creates mistakes that are difficult to fix later. The baker then adds a small amount of salt before preparing the natural starter used to help the bread rise. There are no modern packets of yeast available. Instead, bakers often rely on techniques that have been passed down through generations for many years. He gently combines the ingredients using strong hands that have repeated this process thousands of times before. At first, the mixture feels rough and uneven, but slowly the flour begins absorbing the water and transforming into something entirely different. The baker presses and folds the mixture repeatedly inside the bowl. His hands move with a steady rhythm that requires very little thought. This routine has become almost automatic after years of practice inside the bakery. The room is now warmer because of the nearby oven. This extra warmth helps create better conditions for the dough. Every part of the bakery works together, and each step depends on the success of the previous one. As he continues mixing, small traces of flour cover his apron, his hands, and even parts of the wooden table. This is a normal sight inside every medieval bakery and a sign that another busy morning is fully underway. Preparing dough is physically demanding work. The baker must use considerable strength because the mixture becomes heavier as it develops. His arms have grown stronger over many years of repeating these same motions every day. The once separate ingredients are now slowly becoming a single smooth mass. The baker knows there is still much work ahead, but this transformation always marks an important moment in the beginning of each day's bread making. The baker now lifts the dough from the bowl and places it onto a large wooden table dusted with flour. The surface has been used every day for many years and carries countless marks from previous mornings. He gently presses both hands into the dough, feeling its texture and softness. This simple touch tells him whether the mixture is developing properly or still needs more work. Kneading begins with a steady rhythm. He pushes the dough forward, folds it back, and repeats the motion again and again. There is no rushing because good bread cannot be forced into existence. Every movement has a purpose, and every repetition slowly improves the structure hidden inside the dough. His strong hands continue working while the warmth from the oven spreads throughout the bakery. The combination of heat, patience, and experience all come together during this stage. Outside, the sky continues growing brighter, but inside the bakery, the most important work is already well underway. The baker occasionally pauses for a few seconds to study the dough carefully. If it feels too dry, adjustments may be necessary. If it feels too wet, extra flour may be added. These decisions are not written in books, but learned through many years of daily practice. As he continues kneading, the dough slowly becomes smoother and more elastic. The roughness begins disappearing, replaced by a soft and flexible texture. This transformation may seem simple, but it is the result of careful attention and repeated effort. Tiny particles of flour float through the warm air around him, His apron, sleeves, and hands are now completely covered in white dust. This familiar sight has become an ordinary part of his life and represents another successful beginning to the day's work. Preparing dough is not a quiet task for the body. It requires strength, endurance, and concentration. Although the motions appear simple, repeating them for hours every day can be exhausting even for an experienced baker. The baker silently counts the loaves he must produce before customers begin arriving. Every family in town depends on fresh bread, and he understands the responsibility that comes with providing such an important food. After many minutes of work, the dough finally reaches the texture he has been waiting for. It no longer sticks heavily to the table and now moves smoothly beneath his hands. This is a sign that the process is moving in the right direction. The baker carefully gathers the finished dough into a large rounded shape and prepares it for its next period of rest. Soon it will begin rising, bringing him one step closer to filling the bakery shelves with fresh bread for the entire town. The baker now covers the dough with a clean linen cloth and places it in a slightly warmer area near the oven. This resting period is just as important as mixing and kneading. During this time, the dough quietly changes on its own, slowly preparing itself for the next stage of bread making. He does not simply walk away while waiting. Instead, he occasionally returns to inspect the dough. Small changes begin appearing little by little. The surface becomes softer, and the entire mass slowly starts expanding. Years of experience allow him to recognize these signs immediately. The bakery is no longer silent as it was earlier in the morning. More sounds are beginning to appear throughout the town. People are waking up, animals are becoming active, and another ordinary medieval day is gradually taking shape outside. The baker takes this short moment to clean his wooden tools and organize his workspace. A clean bakery allows work to continue smoothly later in the day when customers begin arriving, and every minute becomes valuable. He gently lifts one corner of the cloth and smiles with quiet satisfaction. The dough is responding exactly as he expected. There is a sense of pride in watching simple ingredients slowly transform into food that will nourish hundreds of people. As dawn fully arrives, the bakery now feels completely alive. The oven is hot, the dough is rising, and the day is finally unfolding exactly as planned. Soon, fresh bread will begin its journey from the baker's hands to the tables of an entire town. The first light of sunrise now reaches the medieval town, and the baker officially enters the busiest period of his day. The long hours of preparation are finally beginning to show results. The oven is hot, the dough is ready, and the bakery feels alive with warmth. Outside, the town slowly wakes from its sleep as people prepare to begin another ordinary day many centuries ago. The baker walks carefully around the bakery and checks every corner one more time. He makes sure that the wooden tables are clean, the flour sacks are protected, and every tool is close at hand. Once customers begin arriving, there will be little time to search for anything. Good organization is one of the hidden secrets behind every successful bakery. He gently uncovers the dough and smiles at the changes that have happened during its resting period. The dough has become softer, larger, and easier to shape. This quiet transformation always reminds him that patience is one of the most important skills a baker can possess. Seeing both hands, he carefully divides the dough into equal portions. Every loaf should be similar in size because every family expects fairness when buying bread. Years of experience have taught him how to estimate these portions without needing scales or measuring devices. Outside, the medieval town is becoming busier with every passing minute. Farmers prepare their carts, merchants unlock their shops, and neighbors begin greeting each other. Meanwhile, inside the bakery, the baker continues his work quietly, knowing that hundreds of people will soon depend on the bread he is preparing. The baker begins shaping each loaf with careful and steady movements. He rolls the dough, folds the edges, and gently places every piece onto wooden boards. Although he has repeated these actions for many years, he never becomes careless. Every loaf represents a family's meal, and even small mistakes can affect the final result later in the morning. Sunlight now enters the bakery through small windows and spreads across the wooden tables. The room that was once dark and silent only a few hours ago is now warm and full of life. Tiny particles of flour float through the air while the smell of wood smoke and fresh dough creates a comforting atmosphere inside the bakery. The sounds outside continue growing louder as more people begin their day. Horses pull carts through narrow streets. Merchants prepare their stalls, and neighbors exchange brief greetings before starting work. The baker hears these familiar sounds every morning and uses them almost like a natural clock. He quietly reviews the number of loaves he must finish before the busiest customers arrive. Some families will purchase a single loaf, while larger households may buy several. The baker has learned to predict these patterns through many years of serving the same community every day. The day is now fully underway. The peaceful darkness of early morning has disappeared, replaced by movement, warmth, and responsibility. Standing inside his bakery, the baker knows that his work has only just begun, and many hours of careful labor still remain ahead of him. The baker carefully places the shaped loaves onto long wooden boards and leaves enough space between each one. He knows they will continue to expand before baking begins. Every loaf is arranged with precision because uneven spacing can affect the final result. After many years of experience, these movements have become natural, almost as if his hands know the routine without needing instructions. Outside the bakery, the medieval town is now fully awake. More people walk through the narrow streets carrying baskets, tools, and supplies for the day ahead. Children begin helping their families, while merchants prepare to open their shops. The baker hears these sounds drifting through the doorway and knows the busiest hours are quickly approaching. The first customers may soon appear at the bakery entrance. Some are workers hoping to buy bread before beginning a long day of labor, while others are parents preparing meals for their families. Fresh bread is an essential part of daily life, and many people depend on the baker's careful work every single morning. The baker continues moving from one task to another without hesitation. He checks the loaves, organizes his workspace, and keeps a close eye on the oven. Although many things happen at once, years of practice have taught him how to remain calm under constant pressure and responsibility. Sunlight now fills the bakery completely. The dark and quiet world of early morning has transformed into a busy and active place full of purpose. The smell of warm bread, burning wood, and fresh dough surrounds the room as another ordinary day in a medieval town officially begins. The baker hears the soft sound of the bakery door opening for the first time that morning. One of the earliest customers has arrived carrying a small woven basket. These first visitors often come before starting their own workday. The baker greets them with a familiar smile because, after many years, he knows most people in the town by face and routine. As more people begin walking through the streets, the bakery gradually becomes one of the busiest places in town. Warm air escapes every time the door opens, carrying the smell of fresh bread into the morning air. Even from a distance, people can recognize that another day's baking is well underway. The baker moves carefully between the oven, the wooden tables, and the shelves that will soon hold fresh loaves. Every task follows a familiar order that he has practiced for many years. Although the work is demanding, there is comfort in repeating a routine that has become part of his life. The medieval town now feels completely different from the silent world that existed before dawn. Conversations fill the streets, animals move through the market areas, and carts roll over stone roads. The baker quietly watches this transformation while continuing his work inside the warm bakery. Another ordinary day has officially begun. The oven burns steadily, bread is being prepared, and the town is fully awake. For the baker, this is more than a job. It is a responsibility that connects him to every family who will place fresh bread on their tables before the day truly begins. In medieval towns, bread was far more than a simple food. For many people, it was the center of every meal throughout the day. Rich or poor, almost everyone depended on bread in some way. A family's entire daily routine often revolved around obtaining enough bread to feed everyone. Without bread, many ordinary people would struggle to find enough energy to work and complete their daily responsibilities. Most medieval families ate bread several times a day because it was affordable, filling, and easy to share among many people. Bread appeared at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In many homes, it was placed directly at the center of the table, where every family member could easily reach it before eating anything else. For workers who spent long hours doing physical labor, bread was an essential source of energy. Farmers, blacksmiths, builders, and craftsmen often carried pieces of bread with them throughout the day. It was simple to transport, easy to store for short periods, and provided the strength needed to continue working from sunrise until sunset. Even children grew up understanding the importance of bread from an early age. They watched their parents carefully protect every loaf because wasting food was never taken lightly. Every crumb represented time, labor, and valuable ingredients that could not easily be replaced. Bread also created a sense of stability inside medieval communities. When bakeries produced enough bread, people felt secure about their next meal. But if bread became scarce, worry could quickly spread throughout the town because everyone understood how important this single food truly was. In many medieval homes, bread was often the very first food placed on the table each morning. Before eating meat, vegetables, or soup, families would reach for bread because it was dependable and always familiar. Even during difficult times, people tried their best to make sure bread remained available, knowing that it could help satisfy hunger more effectively than many other foods. A loaf of bread rarely lasted an entire day inside a busy household. Parents, children, and elderly family members would all take portions throughout the day whenever they became hungry. Because families were often large, bakers had to prepare enormous quantities every morning to keep up with the needs of the town. Bread was also used alongside many other meals rather than being eaten by itself. People dipped it into soups, stews, and sauces to make every meal more filling. In many ways, bread acted as a companion to nearly every food that appeared on a medieval table. The quality of bread could also reveal information about a person's social status. Wealthier families often had access to finer flour, while poorer families relied on darker and heavier loaves. Even so, both groups depended on bread every single day regardless of their differences. For medieval people, bread was more than nourishment. It represented security, routine, and survival itself. Every sunrise brought another opportunity to bake, buy, and share bread because communities understood that this simple food helped hold daily life together. Many medieval families carefully planned their entire day around bread. Before leaving home for work, parents would make sure there was enough bread for children and elderly relatives who remained behind. Running out of bread could quickly become a serious problem, because preparing or replacing it was never an easy task. This simple food played a central role in keeping households stable and organized every single day. People also learned to appreciate every piece of bread they received. Even small leftovers were rarely thrown away because food was too valuable to waste. Older pieces could be softened in soups or eaten later in the day. This careful attitude toward food became an important habit that many medieval families passed from one generation to the next. In difficult seasons, bread often became even more important. Harsh winters, poor harvests, or unexpected shortages could reduce the amount of food available throughout the town. During these times, every loaf represented security and hope for families trying to protect themselves from hunger. The smell of fresh bread itself became a comforting part of everyday life. As people walked through the streets each morning, the scent coming from local bakeries reminded them that another day was beginning normally. This familiar smell helped create a sense of routine and comfort throughout the community. Over time, bread became more than something people simply ate. It became a symbol of daily life itself. Every baker, farmer, and family contributed in some way to keeping bread available, creating a connection that united the entire medieval town around one essential food. Bread also played an important role during moments when families gathered together, whether it was breakfast before work or an evening meal after a long day. Bread was almost always present on the table. Sharing bread became part of everyday family life and helped strengthen the bond between people living under the same roof. People often judged the success of a day by whether there was enough food remaining at home, and bread was usually the biggest concern. Parents constantly thought about tomorrow's meals and worked hard to make sure their children would never have to face hunger before the next sunrise arrived. Every loaf represented the combined efforts of many different people. Farmers grew the grain, millers turned it into flour, and bakers transformed it into bread. Although each person had a separate role, all of them depended on one another to keep the town functioning properly. For medieval communities, bread was a symbol of reliability in an unpredictable world. Weather could change, harvests could fail, and difficult seasons could arrive unexpectedly. Yet every morning, people hoped to see fresh bread waiting inside the bakery because it represented normal life continuing once again. As another ordinary day unfolded across the town, families gathered around their tables, knowing that bread would once again become part of their meals. It was simple, familiar, and deeply connected to their survival. In many ways, bread was not just food at all. It was one of the foundations that held medieval society together. In many medieval homes, seeing fresh bread on the table brought a sense of relief before the day even began. Parents felt calmer knowing that their families would not start the morning hungry. This simple loaf removed a great deal of worry from daily life because food shortages were always a possibility during difficult times. Bread also connected people through shared routines that rarely changed from one generation to another. Grandparents, parents, and children all grew up eating bread every day, creating traditions that lasted for centuries. These repeated habits helped create stability in a world that was often uncertain and challenging. Even travelers passing through a medieval town quickly understood the importance of bread. One of the first places many visitors searched for was the local bakery. Fresh bread provided quick nourishment and offered a sense of comfort before continuing a long journey to another destination. The baker himself became an important figure within the community because his work directly affected everyone's daily lives. If bread was available, people could focus on their jobs and families. If bread became scarce, concern would spread throughout the town almost immediately. As the sun continued moving across the sky, bread would remain present in homes, workshops, and marketplaces everywhere. From sunrise until evening, this simple food quietly supported an entire community, proving that one ordinary loaf could carry extraordinary importance in medieval life. As the years passed, people rarely questioned the importance of bread because it was woven into every part of their lives. From the moment they woke up until the end of the evening meal, bread remained close by. It was simple, dependable, and familiar. Many people could not imagine daily life without it, because it had become a permanent part of their existence. Even during celebrations and special gatherings, bread often remained present alongside other foods. While wealthier families could afford extra dishes, bread still held its place at the table. This showed that its importance reached far beyond survival and had become deeply connected to culture and tradition. Every morning, bakeries became gathering places where neighbors briefly met before beginning their daily work. People exchanged greetings, shared small conversations, and returned home carrying fresh loaves. In this way, bread quietly helped strengthen relationships throughout the entire community. The journey of a single loaf was much longer than it appeared. It began in distant fields, passed through the hands of farmers, millers, and bakers, and finally arrived at family tables. Each loaf carried the efforts of many hard-working people who all contributed to feeding the town. As another medieval day moved forward, bread continued doing what it had always done for generations. It fed workers, comforted families, and supported an entire society without drawing attention to itself. Though simple in appearance, bread was truly one of the most important foundations of medieval life. Not all bread looked the same in medieval towns. Different families ate different kinds of bread depending on their wealth, occupation, and access to ingredients. A wealthy household could afford softer and lighter loaves, while poorer families often relied on darker and denser bread. These differences made bread an important reflection of everyday social life. White bread was considered one of the most desirable varieties because it was made from finely sifted flour. Producing this flour required more effort and better quality grain. Because of this, wealthier people usually had easier access to white bread than ordinary workers and poor families. Many common people ate darker bread made from rye, barley, oats, or mixed grains. These loaves were heavier and less soft than white bread, but they were filling and practical. For hard-working laborers, this type of bread provided the energy needed to continue working throughout long days. Some bakers created larger round loaves for families, while others prepared smaller loaves for individual customers. The size often depended on household needs and how much a family could afford to purchase each day. Every loaf had a specific purpose inside the community. Bread recipes also changed throughout the year. Different harvests provided different grains, forcing bakers to adapt their methods. A medieval bakery constantly adjusted to whatever ingredients were available, making each season slightly different from the one before. Some bread was made especially for wealthy households and important guests. These loaves were often softer, lighter, and carefully shaped to create a more refined appearance. Bakers paid extra attention to the texture because wealthy customers expected high quality and were willing to pay more for it. A beautiful loaf could even become a symbol of status inside medieval society. Poorer families, however, focused more on practicality than appearance. Their bread was usually darker, heavier, and designed to provide lasting energy throughout the day. Even though it was less expensive, it remained one of the most valuable foods available because it helped sustain entire households. Certain regions also developed their own baking traditions over many generations. Bakers adapted their recipes according to local grains, climate, and available resources. As a result, people traveling from one town to another could notice small differences in the taste, texture, and shape of the bread being sold. Some loaves were baked fresh every morning, while others were made slightly harder so they could last longer. Families often planned ahead because baking new bread every day was not always possible, especially during difficult seasons or periods of heavy work. Walking through a medieval bakery, a customer might see rows of different breads resting on wooden shelves. Some were large and round, others were long and narrow, but every loaf shared one common purpose, helping to feed the people who depended on them every single day. Some bakers also created special bread for important occasions and seasonal celebrations. Although daily bread remained simple, These special loaves sometimes received extra attention and unique shapes. Such bread was not eaten every day, making it feel more valuable whenever families had the opportunity to enjoy it together. Children often noticed the differences between breads long before they understood why they existed. They learned that some loaves were softer while others were heavier and darker. Over time, these small observations helped them understand the social and economic differences within their own community. The smell of different breads could also vary throughout the bakery. Some carried a sweeter aroma, while others smelled earthy and rich because of the grains used in their preparation. These familiar scents became part of everyday life and helped customers recognize what was available each morning. Experienced bakers developed a strong understanding of which bread their customers preferred. They adjusted recipes according to demand, weather conditions, and available grain supplies. This flexibility allowed the bakery to continue serving the town even when circumstances changed. By simply looking at a bakery shelf, people could often understand a great deal about their town. The variety of bread reflected the harvest, the economy, and the needs of different families. Every loaf told a small story about the people who would eventually carry it home. The shape of bread could also vary from one bakery to another. Some bakers preferred large round loaves, while others created longer oval shapes that were easier to carry. These differences were not always based on style alone. Sometimes they helped customers quickly recognize which bakery had prepared the bread. Certain breads were designed to remain fresh for a longer period. Travelers, merchants, and workers who spent many hours away from home often preferred these sturdier loaves. While they were not always the softest, their practicality made them an important part of everyday medieval life. The availability of grain could change from year to year, forcing bakers to become creative. If one grain became scarce, another might replace it. This adaptability allowed bakeries to continue operating even when harvests were unpredictable and conditions became difficult. Customers gradually developed their own preferences over time. Some preferred lighter bread with a softer texture, while others valued heavier loaves that kept them full for longer periods. The baker learned these habits and adjusted his work accordingly. Looking across the shelves of a medieval bakery, a person would see much more than food. Every loaf represented different needs, different traditions, and different lives. Together, these breads quietly reflected the diversity that existed within the entire town. Different breads also changed with the seasons of the year. After successful harvests, bakers often had access to better ingredients and could produce softer and higher quality loaves. During difficult years, however, recipes sometimes became simpler because preserving enough food for everyone became the main priority. Every customer entered the bakery with different needs and expectations. Some wanted bread that would feed a large family, while others only needed enough for a single day. The baker quietly balanced these demands each morning while preparing a variety of loaves for everyone in the community. Over many generations, recipes slowly evolved as bakers shared knowledge with apprentices and younger family members. Small improvements were passed from one person to another, allowing traditions to survive long after individual bakers had retired from their work. Standing inside a medieval bakery, a person would immediately notice that bread was never a single uniform product. Every shelf displayed slight differences in color, shape, texture, and size. These variations reflected the unique needs of an entire town rather than one single type of customer. In the end, the different types of bread all served one common purpose. Whether rich or poor, young or old, every loaf helped nourish the community. This variety allowed medieval towns to function smoothly and prepared the baker for his greatest responsibility, feeding an entire population every single day. Over time, people became deeply attached to the types of bread they grew up eating. Familiar tastes created a sense of comfort that stayed with them throughout their lives. Even when traveling to another town, many people immediately noticed when bread tasted different from what they were used to at home. The baker understood that he was not simply making food. He was preserving traditions that families had followed for generations. Every recipe carried memories, habits, and expectations that people relied upon every single day without even thinking about it. Inside the bakery, variety was essential because no two customers lived exactly the same life. Some worked long hours in fields, some traveled between towns, and others remained at home caring for their families. Different breads helped support these different lifestyles. As morning continued, rows of fresh bread slowly filled the shelves. Each loaf waited for its future owner, and each one would eventually become part of a family's meal. Although they looked different from one another, they all shared the same purpose of nourishing people. By now, the bakery was more than a place where bread was sold. It had become a system that supported the entire town. The different breads prepared each morning were all part of a larger mission that would soon become the baker's greatest responsibility. Feeding an entire community every day. Feeding an entire medieval town was an enormous responsibility that rested heavily on the baker's shoulders every single day. Hundreds of people depended on fresh bread to complete their daily routines, and even a small mistake could affect many families at once. The baker understood that his work was not simply a profession. It was a service that helped keep the entire community healthy, productive, and stable from sunrise until nightfall. Long before customers arrived, the baker had already begun planning how much bread would be needed for the day. He carefully estimated the number of families, workers, travelers, and regular customers who would eventually walk through the bakery door. Producing too little bread could create shortages, while making too much could waste valuable ingredients that were difficult to replace. Every loaf represented more than a meal for one person. A single loaf might be shared between several family members throughout the day. Because bread was eaten at multiple meals, the baker always had to think beyond individual customers and consider the needs of entire households. Every loaf represented more than a meal for one person. A single loaf might be shared between several family members throughout the day. Because bread was eaten at multiple meals, the baker always had to think beyond individual customers and consider the needs of entire households. As the bakery slowly filled with activity, the baker worked with a clear sense of purpose. Every movement contributed to feeding hundreds of people before the day was over. This awareness stayed in his mind from the moment he woke before dawn until his long day of work finally ended. The baker also had to think about unexpected visitors who might arrive during the day. Merchants, travelers, and workers from nearby villages sometimes entered the town and searched for fresh bread before continuing their journey. Because of this, the baker could never prepare only the exact amount needed. A small extra supply often helped prevent shortages later in the day. Every morning required careful coordination between many different people. Farmers supplied grain, millers prepared flour, and the baker transformed those ingredients into food. If one part of this system failed, the entire town could quickly feel the effects. Feeding a community was never the work of one person alone. Inside the bakery, speed and organization became increasingly important as the day progressed. Customers expected fresh bread at reliable times each morning. The baker learned how to balance quality with efficiency so everyone could receive their food without unnecessary delays. The baker also paid close attention to patterns that repeated every week. Some days were busier than others, and certain seasons brought more travelers into town. These observations helped him prepare enough bread without wasting precious ingredients. As people carried fresh loaves home in baskets and cloth bags, the baker quietly watched the town begin another ordinary day. Each customer represented another family that would sit down together and share a meal, all supported by the work that had begun long before sunrise. The baker understood that timing was one of his greatest responsibilities. Bread could not be prepared too early or too late because families expected fresh loaves at specific times each day. A delay inside the bakery could eventually affect dozens of households waiting for their meals. As the morning progressed, more customers entered the bakery carrying baskets and cloth bags. Some arrived alone while others came with children beside them. The baker recognized many familiar faces because he had served the same community for many years. Feeding an entire town also required consistency. People trusted the baker because they believed fresh bread would be available every day. Building the trust took many years, but losing it could happen very quickly if the bakery repeatedly failed to meet expectations. The baker rarely had the opportunity to slow down during busy hours. While customers entered and left, he continued organizing loaves, checking supplies, and preparing for future batches. His work moved in a constant rhythm that lasted throughout the day. Standing inside the warm bakery, the baker could see the results of his efforts spreading throughout the town. Fresh bread was already reaching homes, workshops, and market stalls. Each loaf represented another family beginning their day with food prepared through hours of careful labor. The baker also had to think about tomorrow while working today. He carefully watched how much bread remained on the shelves because these observations would help him prepare for the next morning. Every day provided new information about the town's needs, allowing him to adjust his plans little by little over time. Unexpected events could quickly increase demand for bread. Visitors from neighboring villages, local gatherings, or busy market days often brought more people into town. During these moments, the baker had to work even harder to make sure everyone could still receive enough food. By midday, many of the fresh loaves had already found new homes. Families carried bread back to their tables, workers packed pieces into their meals, and merchants stored some for later in the day. The baker quietly watched as his work spread across every corner of the community. Feeding an entire town was never only about making bread. It was about creating a reliable system that people could trust every single day. This sense of dependability allowed families to focus on their own responsibilities without constantly worrying about food shortages. As another successful morning continued, the baker felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Hundreds of people were now beginning their day with food that had started as simple grain only hours before. Through patience, skill, and routine, he had once again helped support the entire town. The baker also understood that his work affected the mood of the entire town. When shelves were full and bread was available, people felt calmer and more secure. Knowing that an important source of food was ready each morning gave families confidence as they began another demanding day. Throughout the day, the bakery became a place where many different lives briefly crossed paths. Farmers, laborers, merchants, travelers, and parents all entered for the same reason. Even though their lives were different, they were all connected by the simple need for fresh bread. The responsibility of feeding an entire town never truly ended. Even while serving customers, the baker was already thinking about the next batch of bread, the remaining supplies, and tomorrow's workload. His routine was part of a continuous cycle that repeated day after day. As the hours passed, fewer loaves remained on the shelves. This was always a satisfying sight because it meant families across the town now had food waiting at home. Every empty space on the shelf represented another household that would eat that day. By the end of the busiest hours, the baker could quietly see the results of his labor everywhere around him. Bread had traveled from the bakery to kitchens, workshops, and market stalls. Through one simple food, an entire medieval town continued moving forward together. As the years passed, the baker became one of the most trusted people in the town. Families relied on his consistency because they knew that every morning he would wake before dawn and begin preparing the food that everyone depended upon. This trust was built slowly through years of reliable service. Even though people rarely thought about every step involved in making bread, they benefited from the entire process each day. Fields, mills, bakeries, and households were all connected together in one continuous system that quietly supported medieval life. The baker's success was measured not by wealth alone, but by whether the community remained fed and satisfied. Seeing families leave with baskets full of bread gave him a sense of accomplishment that money alone could never replace. By the afternoon, bread was already being shared at tables throughout the town. Workers rested for meals, children gathered with their families, and ordinary life continued because an essential source of food had successfully reached everyone who needed it. As another day moved forward, the bakery slowly grew quieter again. Yet the baker already knew that before the next sunrise arrived, the entire process would begin once more. Feeding an entire town was not a single task. It was a never-ending responsibility that connected one person to an entire medieval community. The baker also understood that every season brought different challenges. During colder months, families sometimes depended even more heavily on bread because fresh foods became harder to obtain. This meant the bakery carried an even greater responsibility during difficult periods of the year. Large baskets of bread slowly moved throughout the town as customers returned home. Some loaves would be eaten immediately, while others would be saved for later meals. In every direction, bread quietly became part of hundreds of different stories unfolding at the same time. The success of a medieval town depended on many occupations working together, but bread remained one of the foundations that supported everything else. Workers could not perform their duties without food, and many of those meals began with a loaf prepared inside the bakery. Although customers only saw the finished bread on the shelves, they rarely witnessed the hours of labor hidden behind every loaf. The baker had already completed many difficult tasks before most people had even opened their eyes in the morning. As evening slowly approached, satisfaction spread quietly throughout the community. Families had food on their tables, workers had completed another day of labor, and the town continued functioning smoothly through patience, discipline, and daily repetition. That the baker had once again helped an entire town thrive. Over many years, the baker learned to understand the rhythm of the entire town. He knew when workers would arrive, when families would shop, and when travelers might appear unexpectedly. This knowledge allowed him to prepare bread more efficiently and avoid shortages during busy periods. Each day followed a familiar pattern that rarely changed. The bakery came alive before sunrise, filled with customers during the morning, and gradually became quieter as the day continued. This dependable routine helped create a sense of order throughout the entire community. The baker also understood that his work brought comfort to people beyond simple hunger. Seeing fresh bread available each day reassured families that life was continuing normally, even during uncertain times when many other things could suddenly change. Without realizing it, every customer participated in a much larger system. A loaf purchased in the morning would become part of meals, conversations, and family gatherings throughout the day. Bread quietly connected hundreds of individual lives together. As another medieval day slowly moved forward, the baker prepared himself to repeat everything again tomorrow. The responsibility never truly disappeared because feeding an entire town was an endless cycle that renewed itself with every sunrise. The baker also learned to prepare for difficult days before they arrived. A poor harvest, bad weather, or a sudden increase in visitors could quickly place extra pressure on the bakery. Experience taught him that careful planning was just as important as physical strength when feeding an entire town. Every morning, dozens of small decisions had to be made inside the bakery. How much flour should be used, how many loaves should be prepared, and how much extra bread should be kept in reserve were all questions that shaped the entire day ahead. Over time, the townspeople rarely stopped to think about how much effort went into keeping bread available every day. They simply trusted that when morning arrived, the bakery would be ready once again. This quiet reliability became one of the strongest foundations of community life. The baker took pride in knowing that his work reached nearly every home in town. Rich families, poor families, workers, merchants, and travelers all depended on the same bakery at different moments throughout the day. In many ways, bread united everyone together. As the sun slowly moved lower in the sky, the town continued functioning because its people had been properly fed since the early morning hours. Another successful day was unfolding, all beginning with the careful work of a baker who had started long before dawn. A medieval baker's workday was far longer than most people imagine. His responsibilities often began long before sunrise and continued until late in the day. While much of the town was still asleep, the baker was already working inside a warm and dark bakery. This demanding schedule repeated itself almost every day, leaving very little time for rest. The baker could not simply choose when to start working. Bread had to be ready before people began their daily routines, forcing him to wake during the middle of the night. Missing this schedule could affect hundreds of people who depended on fresh bread every morning. Even before touching flour or lighting the oven, the baker had already sacrificed several hours of sleep. Over time, this became one of the greatest challenges of the profession. The body constantly demanded rest, but responsibility required him to keep moving. Many people only saw the finished bread sitting on shelves and rarely considered the long hours hidden behind each loaf. Every piece of bread represented countless hours of preparation, physical effort, and careful planning that had started while darkness still covered the town. As the first sunlight slowly appeared outside, the baker had already completed several important tasks. For him, the busiest part of the day often happened before most people had even begun their own daily routines. The baker quickly learned that long hours were not an occasional burden, but a permanent part of his life. Day after day, he repeated the same demanding routine with very few opportunities to sleep longer or rest properly. Even on days when his body felt tired, the bakery still needed to open because the entire town depended on his work every single morning. Unlike many other occupations, the baker's schedule could not easily be delayed. If he woke late or moved too slowly, the effects would spread throughout the town. Families, workers, and travelers would all notice the absence of fresh bread. This constant pressure stayed with him every day. Long working hours also affected his personal life. While other people gathered with their families during the evening, the baker often had to prepare supplies, organize ingredients, and think about the next morning's responsibilities. Work was never completely finished. Over many years, his body slowly adapted to unusual sleeping patterns. He learned to sleep whenever opportunities appeared because full nights of uninterrupted rest were rare. This unusual lifestyle became one of the hidden sacrifices of being a medieval baker. By the time many townspeople finished their first meal of the day, the baker had already been working for several hours. His long schedule quietly supported the entire community, even though most people never fully realized how much time and energy his work required. As the years passed, the baker stopped measuring his days like other people. Instead of following sunrise and sunset, his life revolved around the bakery's demands. While the town slept peacefully through the night, He was already beginning another cycle of work that would support hundreds of people by morning. Long hours slowly became one of the greatest invisible sacrifices of the profession. Customers only saw warm bread waiting on the shelves, but they rarely imagined the exhaustion hidden behind every loaf. The baker accepted this reality because the needs of the town always came first. There were very few opportunities to pause during the busiest hours. One task immediately led to another, creating a continuous flow of responsibilities. Mixing dough, checking ovens, organizing bread, and helping customers all had to happen without wasting valuable time. The baker also had to remain mentally focused despite his tired body. A single mistake could ruin entire batches of bread and create shortages throughout the town. This constant responsibility added another layer of pressure to an already demanding schedule. By the time evening approached, many people were finally preparing to relax. For the baker, however, thoughts of tomorrow had already begun. Another early morning was waiting just a few hours away, and the cycle would soon begin all over again. The baker also sacrificed many quiet moments that other people enjoyed without thinking. While neighbors slept peacefully or spent time with their families, he remained focused on endless responsibilities inside the bakery. His unusual schedule separated him from many ordinary routines of medieval life. Over many years, the body learned to accept the demands of long working hours, but the exhaustion never completely disappeared. Every morning required energy, concentration, and discipline, regardless of how tired he felt from the previous day. The bakery itself never truly felt empty in the baker's mind. Even after finishing his work, he constantly thought about supplies, flour, firewood, and the preparations needed for tomorrow. His responsibilities followed him everywhere he went. Despite these sacrifices, the baker understood why his long hours mattered so much. Hundreds of people depended on him every day, and that sense of responsibility motivated him to continue even during the most difficult periods of the year. As darkness slowly returned to the medieval town, the baker prepared for another short period of rest. He knew that within only a few hours, he would once again wake before dawn and repeat the demanding cycle that had become his entire way of life. The passing of seasons did not reduce the baker's workload. Summer, winter, rain, or cold mornings, his schedule remained almost exactly the same. While other professions sometimes slowed down, the bakery could never stop for long because people needed fresh bread every single day without exception. Long hours also required emotional discipline. There were mornings when the baker felt tired before his work had even begun. Yet he still had to remain focused and organized. His customers depended on consistency, and responsibility often outweighed personal comfort. Many apprentices who entered the profession quickly discovered that baking involved far more endurance than they expected. Making bread was not only about recipes and ovens, it was about accepting a lifestyle built around unusual schedules and constant repetition. After years of following the same routine, the baker developed a deep understanding of time itself. He no longer counted the hours in a normal way. Instead, he measured his days through tasks, responsibilities, and the endless cycle of preparing bread. Although the long hours were exhausting, they also became a symbol of dedication. Every loaf resting on the bakery shelf represented another night of sacrifice, another early morning, and another successful effort to keep an entire medieval town fed. The baker eventually accepted that his life would always move differently from everyone else's. While most people used the night for sleeping, he viewed it as the beginning of another working day. This unusual rhythm became so familiar that it eventually shaped his entire identity and daily existence. There was rarely a moment when he could completely disconnect from his responsibilities. Even during short periods of rest, he remained aware that hundreds of people would soon depend on his work again. That constant awareness stayed with him throughout every season. Years of long working hours also taught him patience. He understood that baking was not a task that could be rushed without consequences. Every stage required attention, and every delay could affect the final result waiting for the town each morning. For younger apprentices, one of the hardest lessons was learning how to endure the demanding schedule. Skill alone was never enough. Success required discipline, persistence, and the ability to repeat the same difficult routine day after day. As another day slowly came to an end, the baker prepared for tomorrow before truly resting. The long hours were exhausting, but they had become an inseparable part of his life. Every sunrise simply marked the beginning of another cycle that would continue all over again. The medieval bakery was one of the hottest places in the entire town. Long before sunrise, the baker had already lit a massive wood-fired oven that would continue burning for many hours. As the fire grew stronger, heat slowly filled every corner of the room. Even during cold winter mornings, the bakery could quickly become an uncomfortable place to work. The intense heat never stayed in one place. It surrounded the baker from every direction as he moved between the oven, wooden tables, and shelves. His body constantly adjusted to changing temperatures while he continued working without long breaks. This exhausting environment was part of his daily routine. Smoke created another challenge that followed the baker throughout the day. Although chimneys helped carry some of it away, traces of smoke often remained inside the bakery. The air could become thick and difficult to ignore, especially during busy hours when the fire burned continuously. Standing near a massive oven for many hours demanded both physical and mental endurance. The baker had to remain focused despite the rising temperature around him. Every task became slightly harder when heat and smoke were constantly present in the background. Most customers only entered the bakery for a few moments before leaving with fresh bread. They enjoyed the warmth briefly, but they rarely imagined what it felt like to spend an entire day inside that environment. For the baker, however, heat and smoke were unavoidable companions every single day.